Buildup to war. Threats and counter-threats. Who's to blame? This article first appeared in January 2022, before February 24th, 2022. Threats and counter-threats flying between Washington and Moscow over Ukraine have caused a flurry of fear and confusion that escalates and expands daily. Is the world on the brink of war? What's it about, and who's to blame? At this writing, the standoff in Ukraine between the United States and Russia had lasted for most of a year. Each side insisted the other is threatening a war reminiscent of the Cuban Missile Crisis of the early 1960s. After 3 negotiating sessions in January, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov declared it absolutely mandatory that Ukraine never, ever become a NATO member. In response, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman said, "We will not allow anyone to slam closed NATO's open door policy." End quote. When U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with Ukraine's President Zelensky in Kiev in October 2021, he promised U.S. support for Ukraine's future NATO membership and blamed Russia for, quote, perpetuating the war in eastern Ukraine, close quote. Russian President Putin declared December 23, 2021, that further movement of NATO eastward is unacceptable. They are on the threshold of our house. End quote. On March 24, 2021, the Ukrainian president decreed Ukraine would take Crimea back from Russia with military measures to achieve de-occupation. The U.S. and NATO voiced unwavering support. In April 2021, NATO backed a Ukrainian offensive in its civil war against Russian allied separatists in the eastern provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk. That's when Russia moved thousands of troops to its borders with Ukraine, signaling it would defend its allies. Stephen Cohen wrote that the pogrom-like burning to death of ethnic Russians and others in Odessa later in 2014 reawakened memories of Nazi extermination squads in Ukraine during World War II. These horrors have all been whitewashed from the American mainstream narrative, despite being well documented. Cohen added that stormtroop-like assaults on gays, Jews, elderly ethnic Russians, and other impure citizens are widespread throughout Kiev-ruled Ukraine, along with torchlight marches reminiscent of those that eventually inflamed Germany in the late 1920s and 1930s. The police and official legal authorities do virtually nothing to prevent these neo-fascist acts or to prosecute them. On the contrary, Kiev has officially encouraged them by systematically rehabilitating and even memorializing Ukrainian collaborators with Nazi German extermination pogroms and their leaders during World War II, renaming streets in their honor, building monuments to them, rewriting history to glorify them, and more. End quote. The people of the self-declared People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk and eastern Ukraine face a complete economic blockade by Ukraine and its Western allies. Historically known as the Donbass region, eastern Ukraine is a mining and industrial center. Donbass miners played a crucial and heroic role in the defeat of the German invasion of the Soviet Union in World War II. Many Russians revere the Donbass as, quote, the heart of Russia, unquote. A November 15, 2021 article by Anatol Levin in The Nation says Ukraine is, quote, the most dangerous immediate problem in the world and also in principle the most easily solved, end quote. The solution has already been proposed and accepted in principle. The Minsk II agreement, adopted by France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine in 2015 and endorsed unanimously by the UN Security Council, end quote. Key elements of the Minsk II deal are full autonomy for Ukraine's eastern regions in the context of decentralization of power in Ukraine, demilitarization, and restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty. Despite agreement by all parties, Levin says, because of the refusal of Ukrainian governments to implement the solution and refusal of the United States to put pressure on them to do so, the settlement is a kind of zombie policy. In mid-December 2021, Russia took a diplomatic initiative and presented a list of security proposals to the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, they include ending NATO's expansion further eastward to include Ukraine, a promise for each side to refrain from hostile activities, and an end to NATO military activities in all of Eastern Europe, Transcaucasia, and Central Asia. There is no other option, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told reporters, since a characteristic feature of the current stage of relations between Russia and the collective West is a complete lack of trust. A New York Times December 16, 2021 report said President Biden is threatening severe consequences should Russia send troops into Ukraine. The Financial Times on December 9th said Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany was top of the list when U.S. officials brainstormed potential sanctions against Russia. Germany and the rest of Western Europe are already facing an energy crunch with skyrocketing prices for natural gas. Europeans need energy security and are wary of war. They want the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline as soon as possible, while the Biden administration calls it a bad deal and claims that it makes Europe vulnerable to Russian treachery. Texas Senator Ted Cruz has pressed hard against the pipeline, which offsets opportunities for U.S. energy companies to supply gas to the European market. U.S. foreign adventures have often constricted Europe's energy sources. A 2021 survey by the European Council on Foreign Relations found that most Europeans want to remain neutral in any U.S. war against Russia or China. But new NATO member states align with the U.S. against Russia. They have installed terminals to receive U.S. liquid natural gas deliveries to reduce dependence on Russian gas. Despite all the diplomatic efforts, powerful institutional and economic forces in the U.S., the military-industrial complex, and big energy companies, among others, are eager for a new Cold War with Russia, which would provide them with boundless opportunities for profitable deals. The U.S. military-industrial complex needs enemies like human lungs need oxygen, the saying goes. When there are no enemies, they must be invented. The demonization of Vladimir Putin and Russia by the U.S. media is part of this policy of inventing enemies. There is a long list of foreign leaders and nations whose attempts to pursue an independent foreign policy, defying the dictates of Washington, have brought down on them the wrath of the empire.